Cow-calf producers in my district are frustrated from astronomically rising input costs to labor shortage to supply chain constraints and an administration that seems more focused on climate change and increasing overburdensome regulations. Our cattle ranchers and farmers are hurting. Family farmers are shuddering across the country as they face diminishing margins and already difficult economy. While cattle markets are increasingly complex and incredibly complex, I don't need to tell you all that any disruptions at the packing sector impact cattle prices. We've seen price disparities between boxed beef and live cattle facing several black swan events, and while I believe there are many factors at play here, including record levels of inflation that this administration is doing nothing about, I do want to discuss cattle markets. After conferring with Tennessee cattlemen and Charles Hord, we want to know what steps have you taken as an industry to minimize the impact of market disruptions, whether those be from fires, a pandemic like COVID-19, which at its peak took roughly 40% of the processing capacity offline, or other unforeseen factors that impact cattle producers and profitability. And I'll open that to any of you who would like to comment.
Thank you for the question. In terms of the steps that we've taken, first of all, the fire in the Holcomb plant. The rest of the industry made up a lot of that lost production by running extra hours, Saturday hours, where normally we would have given our employees time off. That was a big factor. In terms of the pandemic, there was not a lot we could do. We ran as many cattle as we could. We shut down one of our plants for 2 weeks during that time period and opened it back up as soon as we were able to. But our other plants in Kansas, we had weeks where we were running 50% of capacity and contemplated shutting down one shift. So when we have these events, there's not the ability to completely mitigate it. And it happened across the whole industry.
And things like this will happen again, and so I guess what are we doing to mitigate that in the future? Anyone else like to comment?
Congressman Donnie King with Tyson Foods. You know, as a company, we have often annually do risk assessments where we assess what risk we face and what are those mitigation steps. I got to tell you, in conjunction with our board and leadership team, we did not anticipate the pandemic. So there have been a number of key learnings from that. It's an opportunity to go and to get better, and we have, but we're assessing this and future risk similar to these black swan events to try to protect our company.
Okay. We heard suggestions from the producers in our first panel, but I'd like to hear from you all now. What steps do you think can be taken to ensure profitability for all sectors of the cattle industry, including cow-calf producers?
Thank you for the question. I'd like to answer that. I believe we have to look at the situation today in the context of the history. And if you go back before 2016, the packing segment was the smallest profit margin of any segment of the industry, mainly because of overcapacity in the industry. In 2016 forward, capacity had already been taken out. We saw a dramatic increase in the supply of cattle. As a result of that, margin structure shifted to our segment. But historically, it was resided, the cow-calf producers had the biggest share of the profit pie, so to speak, prior to 2016.
Okay, because I've just got 50 seconds, Mr. Klein, I wanted to ask you one more question. Some of the folks continually are pushing for increase in diversified slaughter capacity across the country. They're also pushing for government-mandated levels of cash trades by packers. Your testimony mentions the importance of alternative marketing agreements in allowing your company to grow and compete with the largest packers. Do you think AMAs will be vital to new slaughter facilities coming online across the country?
I think for a new facility to survive, they've got to offer something different, and one of that attributes is quality. The demand for quality beef is very high, and AMAs are a very important piece of that. In terms of the cash market question, more cash trade today will not help the producer. Today, many of the cattle that are brought in on AMAs or other agreements are because the producer wants a guaranteed home for their cattle.
Okay, my time has expired. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.